This is probably one of the hardest videos I think I've ever had to film. Hey guys, what's up? It's Noah, and this week I am going to be sharing my mental health story and my gender journey. If you hear any background noise, my dog is in the room with me. I can't leave her unattended. She's got really bad anxiety. She will shit everywhere. So yeah, just don't mind that. I'll see if I can get her to calm down. But she will be like pacing and things like that, so just kind of bear with her, bear with me. And I guess where I want to start with all this is around the age of puberty, and puberty came early for me because I have asthma and I spent a lot of my childhood in the hospital on steroids trying to get me better. So those steroids kind of pushed forward the timeline of my puberty, and so that started for me around the age of 10. And that is when my mental health started, and when I really started to not like myself. This is also around the time that things in my life weren't the greatest. They weren't bad, but just like things going on in my own head and some of the trauma that I had suffered in earlier years were starting to get to me. And when my body started developing and things like my first period came along, I started feeling very ashamed of myself and not liking myself. And that's around the same time that I switched schools. I started going to a residential school, and it was a school for the visually impaired. And the reason why I bring this up is because living at a residential school and away from your family takes a massive toll on your mental health. I looked at it as they were sending me away. They didn't like me. They didn't want to deal with me. And so they sent me away. And it didn't matter what anyone said to me. It didn't matter what I was told. That is what I believed. And it was very hard going to that school because, like, you don't have parents there. You have staff members. You don't have siblings there. You have roommates. You go to class. You go back to residence. Like, your day is constantly supervised. You don't get to go outside and play when you want to. You don't get to, like, it's all just very...
Hi, editing Noah here. I think what I was struggling to say in this clip is that it was very different from what I was used to, and because it was so different than what I was used to in my home life, it was kind of unsettling going back and forth and, having the freedom to be a kid around my family and then having to kind of switch that off when I went back to school.
I just felt like I didn't really get the chance to be a kid anymore when I was going to that school. And there was also a lot of things that happened at that school that I'm not going to get into because that's a whole separate story time. But basically, it messed me up. And the things that were going on at home messed me up as well. Like I had mentioned, my parents were separated, and I didn't like myself, and my parents didn't like each other. So they were, kind of playing us, like playing my brother and I against each of our parents. Like my mom would play us against our dad would play us against our mom, and we started doing the same thing back, which is completely normal from what I've learned through therapy at this point.
I'm just going to interject here because what I mean by normal is that it was normal given the circumstances. The circumstances themselves were not normal. However, my brother and I's reaction to the situation was normal.
And that us playing our parents back and forth made it worse. There was a lot of moving around. The longest that I've ever gone to the same school for was 3 years. The rest of the time it was like a year here, a year there, moving houses constantly. And So I felt very uprooted and not settled for most of my childhood. Plus, I had a lot of very traumatic things happen to me in my childhood, which again, I'm not going to get into. But basically, I was living in survival mode from a very young age. And finally, um, coming out of survival mode is when my mental health got really bad. Um, and when the kind of questioning my gender and everything came in, I didn't like myself. I didn't know how to. I like mentally could not grasp the idea of I come first. In my life, I come first. Because all through my childhood, I was constantly setting myself on the back burner and not paying attention to myself and worrying about myself at a later date. And so I learned through that process not to like myself, not to care about myself. And when I finally had the freedom and I finally had people in my life telling me, you need to start looking after you, it was a new thing for me. So I fell into the addiction of getting pets. Um, I always took very good care of my pets. I loved my pets, but the problem is that I used pets as a way to avoid taking care of myself. Now, I'll explain a little bit by what I mean. So I had a lot of small animals. I had a rabbit. You guys probably remember me talking about Blue. I had rats. I've had hamsters. I've had like so many different small animals. And it was because I craved that dependency. I craved that another living thing to depend on me for their well-being, because that's what I was so used to with being brought up. Um, and so it was really an avoidance and a distraction from taking care of myself. Um, like as bad as my days got and as bad as things were like, oh, I don't want to live, I had something that depended on me, and I had something that needed me to get up every morning and feed it and take care of it and all of that. At the same time, I went to, I'm kind of hopping all over the place, so the timeline isn't very clear. I'm just mentioning things as they go. So after
I apologize that I keep interrupting this video with my editing commentary. However, I really don't want to have to film this video again. It was very strenuous, and I just wanted to pop in here quickly and mention that I have decided to not include a lot of parts of my life because I don't want to upset anyone or stir the shit pot. I just want to share, I guess, my part of the story and how it affected me, not necessarily the actions of others in my life. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to be missing out on a lot of this stuff, and hopefully one day I will be able to like share the whole story, but for right now I am not in that place.
school, actually, so in grade 12, my last year of high school, I barely attended school. I hated school. I hated the people at school. I hated my life. I didn't want to live. Um, and I worked really hard at school. Like, even though I wasn't going to school, I did all of my stuff online and everything. And I still ended up on honor roll that year, which is something that I'm very proud of, but um, it was one of the worst years of my life. Um, and I have a whole other story time. Like, there's a lot. I have so many stories that I could tell you guys, but where I was living at the time was very toxic, and it was actually very, very haunted. And I think that that is partially because of how much toxicity was in the house that I was living at that time. So after high school, I took a year off, and things gradually got worse. Um, and then I ended up moving in with my dad and started attending college. And I took child and youth care. And things finally settled down. I was getting into a routine for the first time in a really long time. I was without weed, which was like a first in a really long time, like since my childhood, that I had gone without smoking weed. And I got better for a little while, but then when college started, um, I had so college, for anyone who knows, is very stressful. It's stressful to begin with. But the course, or the program I should say, that I was taking was child and youth care. And so that is for people who want to work in social work with children or work for CAS here in Canada. That stands for Children's Aid Society. And I wanted to work for CAS. And so I was putting my all into paying attention to specific classes. Like, I was putting my all into everything, each of the classes that I took, but there were specific classes that I paid extra attention to, and one of those classes was response to abuse. The professor was amazing. However, the the topics covered in that class were insanely difficult. Obviously, it's called response to abuse, so you're learning about the different kinds of abuse and how it shows up in children. And at the same time that I was learning all this, I was analyzing myself and my childhood, and that's when CPTSD kicked in for me. I started having flashbacks. I started having consistent nightmares, to the point that I didn't want to sleep because of how bad the nightmares were getting, and my mental health just plummeted so quickly. And that led to my first trip to the hospital in November of 2019. I did not stay. I went home with a safety plan, and I finished the semester. I failed the semester, but I didn't drop out. It was so close to the end of the semester anyway that I figured, like, my one exam, I went in for the exam, and I maybe half-heartedly answered 5 questions. Like, I was so out of it.
Just as another example as to how bad my mental health was at this time, I had a meeting with the program coordinator who also happened to be a professor of mine at the time. And I am not a crier. I don't really cry, especially in front of people. And during this meeting, I completely broke down sobbing in front of the program coordinator. So, yeah, it was like a really good time.
And I failed. And that was really hard, because I had never failed anything in my life. I was always a really good student. I was always on top of my shit, and my world was just crumbling around me. And so I started to get into counseling, and I didn't know where to start. That's the problem. Like, I knew that I needed counseling at the time, but when you don't know where to start with counseling and you don't know what is healthy versus unhealthy.
By you, I mean me. Like, I'm talking about myself here.
Or what is wrong versus right in your own head because you're so messed up, therapy is not going to help. You need to come to some conclusions on your own before you can really start to correct those mind frames. And I wasn't there. I didn't know up from down. I didn't know left from right. I was so mentally fucked up, like, just completely not there. And so that led into me coming out as trans. And when I came out as trans, I moved back in with my mom. I stayed on her couch for 3 months until we were able to get a place of our own. And for the first little while, I was happy and things were going well. Then there was my mental health was obviously still an issue, and the distraction of coming out as a trans man and this new thing was like exciting, and it helped a little bit in the way of, like I said, it was a distraction. So then I wasn't completely happy, and I went back in the closet, and I got into a not great relationship. It was very short-lived. It was a very short relationship. However, I had some major consequences come from that. I actually, I'm not gonna go into what those consequences were because I don't think I'm ready to share that yet on this channel. Maybe one day, but we'll see. I got into that short-lived relationship. It went very, very quickly. It was like we had been together for a year, but we had only been together for like 2 months. And that in itself was very toxic, just how fast-paced it was. And so after the breakup and after the consequences of that relationship, I went back in the closet and I ended up in the hospital again. Or no, sorry, I came out as a trans man again and ended up in the hospital again. That's what I meant to say. My depression was really, really bad. My mental health was fucking terrible, and I came out of that depressive state, and again, I was doing well for a while, and then earlier this year, I experienced psychosis for the first time. For anyone who doesn't know what psychosis is, I can't really explain it, but the best way I can explain it is by telling you what happened. So I was talking to my then girlfriend at the time, and we were getting to know each other over text, and I was listening to music, and she brought up the fact that she likes Billie Eilish. And in that moment, the song that I was listening to ended, and Billie Eilish came on. Now, granted, my anxiety had been building up for weeks by this point. I had so much anxiety, it was making me sick every second of every day. I was so anxious, and something snapped. The song ended, Billie Eilish came on, and something snapped. I all of a sudden believed that my girlfriend was in my phone, and she was working with the police to try and catch me on something, even though I had done nothing wrong. I believed that there were people out to get me, that they were on their way, they were coming, and I started running around the apartment and locking the doors, closing the curtains, running around with a knife, and I so wholeheartedly believed that I was in danger and I was in a psychotic state, and I got it in my head that if I used the knife to end my life, I would be winning. I would win. The people who were after me would not be able to get me, and I would be free. And I was so scared, and I thought this is the only way out. And it was honestly the scariest thing that I've ever been through. There's one other time in my life that comes pretty close, but not it. This is the scariest thing, because I wholeheartedly believed that somebody was after me, and there was no reason for me to believe that there was somebody after me. And the only insight that I had was I've seen this before. I have had a person in my life do this and show this exact behavior before. And so I realized that I've seen this before, that I've had somebody else in my life show this psychotic behavior before, and so I got the notion to call my brother, and he talked me down out of it, and the next day I admitted myself to the hospital. After that, something changed in my brain. I can't explain it. But all of a sudden, I was fully invested in getting myself better. I was fully invested in getting the help that I needed to figure out what was going on inside my brain and deal with the past trauma and all of that stuff. And I hit it head on. Every moment of every day, I was working on myself, I was working on my mental illness, and I was doing what I absolutely had to make myself better. And that is kind of the end of my gender journey, because in doing that and in spending so much time with myself and really getting to know myself, I realized that I wasn't a trans man, that I just really was looking for any reason to be anyone other than who I am. Because I didn't like myself, and I still don't like myself, and I'm working on that. I'm learning to like myself, and it's not easy. But I wanted to kind of share this, my story, with anyone out there who has experienced mental health, or who struggles with mental health, has past trauma, is struggling with their gender identity. Like, there's so much to be said with my story, and I feel like there's a lot that you can take away from this. And I didn't want to film this video because it's hard for me to talk about, but at the same time, if my story can kind of help somebody else, I want to share it. That's kind of what I want this channel to be. I don't want anybody else in the world to experience what I have experienced within my lifetime, or I'm currently experiencing. It's not nice, it's not pleasant, but I also know that I don't have the control to not let those things happen. I can't prevent trauma from happening to other people, but I can help share my story and hopefully in the future share some coping mechanisms and give a little bit more insight into the kind of trauma and how that affects my life, and all of those things. I want to share that with you guys, because if it if it reaches just one of you, and if my story makes you feel like you're not alone and it will get better, that is my goal. That is what I hope. Even if just one person watches this video and it speaks to them, that is all I want. So with that being said, that is where I'm going to leave this video. I'm sorry it was kind of a downer. But I wanted to share my story so that in the future I can create videos on how to cope with mental health and all those, like, you know, what anxiety looks like, what it feels like, what depression feels like, how CPTSD affects me. Like, I want to do mental health videos. Some of them are going to be hard, like this one, but others I feel like will be educational and helpful, with coping strategies and why therapy is so important, and the different perspectives that people have on mental illness. I'm rambling. I'm like going off. But anyway, I'm going to leave this video at that. I hope you guys got something from this. And thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your support. You guys have been phenomenal. And I'm so excited to be back on this channel and doing what I like to be doing. So, yeah, bye.